unreachedheart.com.
Hi, this is Linda Starwolf, and I mainly go by Starwolf. And I like to begin everything that I do by closing my eyes and inviting all those who would like to close their eyes as well, and to take a deep breath and to fill our bodies up so we can feel, so we can think, and so we can also just let go and settle in and settle down into this human form while opening to this deep inner knowing that we are also spirits and souls as well as human beings. And to feel that mixture of human, soul, and spirit coming together, all in this incredible form. And take another deep breath, and this time really send the energy right into the center of the chest, right into the whole heart chakra area, both the inner heart, the actual human heart, and all around the form where the chakras really live and vibrate and penetrate into the form. So settle into the heart and open up the heart. And that's my spiritual practice, like the Dalai Lama has said, to cultivate the warm heart. Exhale fully and release and letting go of any distractions so that whatever needs to come through that can be helpful and be of service at this time is easily and readily available to us all. And then taking another breath, exhaling fully, we can open our eyes and move along.
And so you are the founder of Shamanic Breathwork. So maybe you could kind of explain, like, what is Shamanic Breathwork?
Well, that really is the million-dollar question. And I answer this question a lot. I do a lot of radio interviews, and I think every time I answer this question, I say something different, which reminds me of my adopted Seneca Wolf Clan grandmother, Twyla Nitsch, who passed at 94 3 years ago, when I was working with her a lot, and she was teaching me various things. And I would be with her the next time, and I would ask her something else about information I'd gotten before, and she would say something else. So I keep learning and growing about this process. It really is an amazing, magical process that I have constructed some words around to explain it, but at its depths, it is truly magical. And for those people who experience it, they know what I'm speaking about, because it's really guided from within. And even though we train people and certify people to be facilitators, the end result is what we're really teaching people to do is to listen to their innermost self. First and foremost, I think the shamanic breathwork is about awakening the shaman within. I think it's about the age that we've entered into, and at the risk of sounding too woo-woo new age, I'm going to say that we are entering into a new age. This is the age that's been predicted for a long time. It's what was sung about in the 60s and the age, dawning in the age of Aquarius. And whether people believe in astrology or believe in those kinds of New Age aphorisms, certainly people can understand that we are in a huge process of shift and change. And sometimes it's wonderful to find some words that can help us make sense and meaning out of that. So the shamanic breathwork, quite simply, and I'll speak more specifically, I'm speaking globally about it right now, but it really is a process that allows us to drop into the deepest part of ourselves and to also into the most expansive parts of ourselves, to remember who it is we really are. The journey itself really takes us beyond the limits of the little self. And it takes us to the little self as well. If we have areas there that we call unfinished business, And at some levels, the unfinished business is an ongoing dynamic, because one of the first things we teach with shamanic breath work is that we're not on a linear path. We're not even on a circular path. We're on a spiral path. And this truly is a path of not only human biological evolution, it's also a path of spiritual evolution. I called it, a term that I coined about 3 years ago, shamanic psycho-spiritual. So there's been the term out there, shamanic or shamanic and spiritual or shamanic work or psycho-spiritual, but the shamanic psycho-spiritual work is really about employing methods, tools, processes, and journeys that take us to this more expanded sense of self. In that process, we access our humanity, and that includes our physicality, our emotions, our thinking, and ability to reason. We access our heart chakra, which is really, I believe, connected to the soul. And we access the upper chakras that are reaching more heavenwards or more towards expansion with the crown and the sixth and the fifth chakras. So this work is very much about being a walker between the worlds, and the worlds we walk between are the chakras. Now, anybody who knows more in depth about chakras knows that there's more than 7. There's actually many, many, many chakras and meridians, but in the West we know about the 7, if you will. It's like knowing about the states of a country versus the cities or the counties. And so these bigger ones have a lot of power and a lot of energy and can contain all the other chakras within them. In the shamanic breathwork journey and process, as we utilize the breath, and with our method we use music of various kinds, and I'll say more about the mechanics in a moment. In that process itself, we are seeking to activate and energize and raise the life force energy. Some call it Kundalini, some call it Holy Spirit. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It is our life force energy. And with the holy process, really, of sacralizing the breath, of breathing in and exhaling fully and deeply for just a few moments, we give prana, we give new energy to our bodies and to our brain chemistry. We change our brain chemistry, and we activate our chakras. When that happens, we begin to journey. And I do just want to say here that probably to me one of the most important things about this is it's right underneath our nose, this amazing process that we all have access to, regardless of creed or color or nationality or religion. It's a respecter of all or none. We all have access to the breath. And so it's like all mysteries. It's right underneath our nose.
And so just from my own experience of doing breath work, there seems to be, you're breathing and you're breathing until you're surprised.
Yes.
You're kind of going through, and then you're either cathartic in some way, you're laughing, crying, screaming, and dancing. And maybe you could just sort of talk about what that actually looks like over the course of a session.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks many different ways depending on the session, and I've done everything from 15 minutes in a bookstore with a whole 80 people sitting in an East-West bookstore doing breath work while other people are buying books, or whether we're in an intensive and we have people there for a week or 2 weeks, or whether we're in an individual session or in a group like we were yesterday with Breathe America, where we had 80 people breathing for an hour at a time, a little, actually more like about 70 or 80 minutes. What it generally looks like, though, is we like for people, if we can, when we have a full day, to have a partner. And that's their co-journeyers. We have a definition that we call journeyer or shamanic journeyer or breather, and then co-journeyer. And those two come together, and they might be perfect strangers or they might know one another. It doesn't really matter. But they come together, and we like to do this if we can, and I prefer to do it in a group setting, primarily because I know that the energy of masses of people doing this work lifts the energy for them in the collective. And for people who are not even doing the work, we're all affected when any of us change consciousness. So when you have a whole room full of people changing consciousness and moving, it is a very powerful energy. It's a movement. There's a new video out about movements that I really liked, showing what a movement looks like. Starts out with one guy dancing, then all of a sudden another guy dancing out in public, and they're kind of dancing to the drumming, and then 3 or 4 people come up, and then all of a sudden everybody on the beach gets up and comes. So this is a movement that happens with people. As you have the journeyer, and co-journeyer together, they then make an agreement with one another, and an agreement about touching or connecting during the breath work in different ways. And touching, by what I mean by that, is handing a person a Kleenex or placing your hand on their heart. It's not an involved touching for the co-journeyer. They're just really there as a sacred witness, kind of like the alter ego, to witness the process and be able to reflect it. Because we know where two or more are gathered, there's reflection, and reflection is a big part of being human. Not great to be totally dependent upon it, but it is part of our human nature to be reflected, and that's part of being loved. And so there is this loving bond that is connected. The group leader or facilitators will then set the room where people have mats or blankets and perhaps pillows to be comfortable. They'll turn down the lights. They will do a meditation to take people into the journey after fully explaining to them what the process might look like. And there's a whole laundry list that we go through with folks before we engage in the process itself, answering questions and such. Then people decide who's going to breathe first or journey first. The person who lies down is the journeyer, the person who's sitting as the witness or the co-journeyer. And the main facilitator at that point, or group leader, leads them into a meditation, leads the whole room into a meditation. Basically to do what I did at the beginning. That is to drop down into your heart, to begin to settle into your bodies, to be aware of the energy that's in your bodies, and to put an energetic circle of protection around you. Just kind of like saying, notice that you're going on a journey, be aware of that. It's kind of like, putting your seatbelt on when you get in a car. However, in this case, the protection is taking your seatbelt off. Sometimes we make a joke about it during the meditation. I'll say, okay, put your seat backs back, lower your tray tables, and take your seatbelt off. And prepare to take off. And turn on all your energetic connections to the universe. At that point, because we acknowledge, when I say we, I'm talking about our university and our association, Venus Rising, we acknowledge that however many people are on the planet, in fact, I say however many beings, because it includes more than people, are on the planet, that's how many pathways there are to God or to Source. And sometimes the word God turns people off, and so I think God is good orderly direction in our lives. And so however many people there are, that's how many paths there are to Source. So there's a place in that meditation that I personally always invite everyone in the room to connect to their Source, to connect to whatever's most sacred or holy to them, and whether that's one Source or the Great Mystery or their four-legged at home or a spirit guide or an animal totem or an angel or any of the avatars or ascended masters or deities or gods or goddesses that have ever appeared on this planet, or even in other dimensions, or a whole pantheon sometimes. Sometimes people will they'll say that in their circle of protection or guides, they'll have say perhaps the wolf, and then Anubis, and maybe even a figure in history such as Gandhi, and maybe Jesus and Kuan Yin, their grandmother who's passed to the other side. All these helpers and support. I happen to like that very much. I feel like we need a lot of help right now. So I have no problem calling in help when I'm personally breathing. But also if sometimes people are agnostic or atheist, it doesn't matter. They will still have a powerful spiritual experience of some kind because we are spiritual beings. So even if a person doesn't have a particular connection to in their own mind or in their daily practice, just the fact that they're here and wanting to uplift consciousness on the planet shows what a good person they are and that they have a deep spiritual connection to their values. And so they can connect to that, to the spirit of love, because that's not something you can see. You can see demonstrations of, but you can't see like love walking around except in people. So there's certainly a spirit, if you will, or an archetype of love and other qualities like that, like peace and forgiveness. After we've called in what's sacred to people, we then invite them to begin a breathing process. And in the beginning, I encourage people to just breathe in a deep, rhythmic way. I say a circular breath. Just kind of and keep breathing like that until they're surprised. And people often do not know what I mean until they start breathing. I didn't know what that meant until I actually said it once. But I would say, just breathe until you're surprised. And what that meant is, all of a sudden, there would be an awareness that you weren't in Kansas anymore, Dorothy, that something was changing. You felt energy in your body, sensations, lights begin to flash behind your eyes. You might smell something strange. You might have a taste in your mouth. You might be hearing sounds in the music. Like somebody yesterday said to me, what was that sound in the music that I heard with all this chanting at one time? And I went back and listened to that particular CD, and what they were asking for was not there. So it's distorted, but in a good way. People are moving into an altered state. Their brain chemistry is changing by the process I'm describing, and the breath is accelerating the process. At that point, they might start having visions. They might be very sensory alive. They might see lights. They might begin to experience past lives, even if they don't believe in them. They'll say, I had a past life experience. I don't believe in that, but I had one. And I'll say, well, how do you know it was past life? Well, I just know. And I'm like, okay. So they'll have connections with extraterrestrials, even if they don't believe in them. They'll have connection with people who've passed to the other side, even if they don't believe in an afterlife. Belief does not matter or factor in to the shamanic breathwork journey. And I think it's because it's beyond the brain. It's beyond thinking. It's beyond what's rational. And Stan Grof said in his work in holotropic breathwork that it's beyond the brain. And so at this point, people could go into a physical response of some kind about abuse that's happened in their lives. They could have a whole history come up of their lifetime. I call it their personal history or her story that comes up. They could have an experience of dropping into the void, which is a realm of consciousness where there's no thinking or feeling per se. There's just a deep, deep sense of being in a place of no-thingness. Very peaceful and very restful, but very altered. And they might not even hear the music really or anything else. They come back from a very long journey. And they also might experience their actual birth. The birthing realm or the world of the birthing experience is anything from the moment of conception till their actual birth, until they've entered into this world, until the cord has actually been cut. Sometimes people have major birth trauma, so it's a place that is being tapped into right now by many different sources for healing. But that's really relatively new, only in the last, I would say with popularity, the last 10 to 15 years, and with hardly anybody really recognizing that it had much to do with anything, about 25 to 30 years. It's kind of odd to think that we wouldn't think being in the womb had much to do with who we are. But it hasn't been that long ago, probably more like about 50 to 75 years, that it didn't appear that your family of origin had much to do with who you were. It wasn't until Freud and psychoanalysis that hardly anyone on the planet thought who your parents were had anything to do with who you were. So anyway, all these experiences and more can come up. One could happen, just being in the void the whole time, reliving birth experiences, family of origin experiences and history, sensory experiences, transpersonal experiences. Any of these could happen, or a whole conglomeration. Some people have all of them at once. When people go through this experience, you have facilitators. We call it facilitating or walking the floor, checking in. Those facilitators have been trained how to work with people or how not to work with people. Sometimes people don't need anything. They're fine on their journey. And sometimes you can tell that if people had a little bit of touch in a certain area or a little bit of focused body work or even soul return work or soul retrieval work, in our work we call it soul return because it's somewhat different than soul retrieval. And it's a method I learned from a Cherokee teacher actually about 30 years ago. But in the soul return work and the extraction release work, people can't sometimes do that by themselves, so we assist. Some people are able to do it by themselves, but if you have an itch in your back and you can't quite reach it, it's kind of cruel to say you're just going to have to scratch that yourself. There's most of it you can scratch, but sometimes you need somebody to get to that point that you can't get, and then it releases it. So facilitators are there to acknowledge your shaman within is doing the work. They're not healing you. When you hear somebody say they're a healer around shamanic breath work, they're not talking about putting their hands on you and healing you. They're talking about assisting you in your healing. You go through the journey for perhaps, depending on the session, it could be an hour, 90 minutes, and sometimes we do 2-hour sessions. The most we do is about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Your co-journeyer is helping and assisting in any way that they can, mainly by holding the space. And then, at the end of that process, what happens is that the main facilitator will begin to do the heartbeat of the drum, and basically it'll sound something like this. Take a deep breath. It's the way it begins, the way it ends. It's like life and death. Exhale and come back fully. And begin to come back and bring back only that which wants to come back, leaving the rest and letting it go if you're ready. Come back and remember what you need to, and welcome home. And then people just in their own consciousness begin to slow down the breath. Maybe they already have, because maybe they breathed at the beginning and just went on a journey a whole time. Or maybe they had to pick up the breath throughout the journey several times to get back into it again. But at this point, they really now stop the breathwork breath and begin to come back. I want to say one more thing about the breathwork breath. We only instruct people in the beginning to breathe in through their nose and out through their mouth in a circular breath. After a few moments, we say, go with whatever your body wants to do, however it wants to breathe. This is not a like for 10 minutes doing pranayama or a certain technique you have to do the whole time. The technique, like everything else, once you've got in the groove, falls away. And then you're in the natural way and being guided by something bigger than your mind or the technique. The last thing I will say about the breath work proper, meaning the actual journey part of it, is that we designed the music to go to the order of the 7 chakras and the vibration of that. And we do that for a reason. First of all, my breathwork teacher, Jacqueline Small, who created Integrative Breathwork and the Psyche Institute many years ago, really put together the music from kind of a, I guess you could say, a chaotic moving around in all different directions of wonderful music, but not any particular order, into this beautiful pattern of putting it into the 7 chakras. And I still utilize that and follow that with her blessing in my work and integrate it into my work. And it's really a nice flow, if you can imagine the Kundalini energy starting at the base of the spine with drumming and movement, and moving then into more of a storyline as you get into the power chakras, and then into heart music with strings or violin or piano, and then into upper kind of celestial, or what we often think of as toning or harmonic, like Gregorian chants or celestial music that goes up to the crown. And that's why when at the end we drop back down to the heart, we're playing music that brings you fully back into being human, but with a higher vibration. Like yesterday I played at the end Kenny Loggins, Love Is You, Love Is Me. And then after the second session, All We Need Is Love. Things like that to bring you really back to connect here, not leaving you out just in the ethers or down here in the, struggling to be alive, to bring us into our heart. Because I really believe that's where we need to be living from right now, is from our heart. It's different than emotions, different than thoughts. It's a higher energy. So people come back. At that point, we've done many things. We have had people make masks. We've had people do collage, work with clay, journal, do mandalas. So we have people do something in the form of art that's more concrete that they can see and speak about to help ground them, bring them back, and share with others. A big part of this process is the sharing and the telling. And that's been true with shamanic tribes, to share the stories, whether it's telling it around the campfire, painting it on the teepee, recounting the stories for generations to come. Telling the stories are important to release the ones we're ready to release, to embrace the new ones that are coming in, and to track our journey, and to help other people as well, and allow other people to teach because they're relating to where we're going, or to learn because they're relating to where we've come from. And that's pretty much the way we do all those journeys, even in a 15-minute version in the East West bookstore. I'm still thinking about every one of those components, believe it or not, of how to condense that into the Reader's Digest condensed version for people. And it works. Believe it or not, it does work. Whether we have 15 minutes or a couple hours or a whole day with one another. Everything I've just told you, of course, is in my book, Shamanic Breathwork. Pretty much it's all there. It's a whole chapter on the journey and describes how to make that journey if you're in a group and with a group of people in a workshop. And then there's another chapter on solo journeying. And we tell what's not recommended. If you have certain conditions, we wouldn't recommend that you journey solo. But if you are a journeyer already and you're used to going into what I call natural altered states and opening to your source and being guided, then there's no reason why you can't do some solo journeying. To this day, I still choose to have a partner. Right before I came, I had my good friend and co-author, Ruby Falconer, breathe me before I came here to do Breathe America, because I'll tell you, it's really nice. If you're a leader and a teacher and you're out there facilitating people all the time, it's really nice to lie down and have somebody, even if they're not touching you, even if you don't need anything, to be there to run the music, to give you a drink of water, hand you a tissue, and give you a hug when you come back, and to hear your story.
And so you mentioned a couple other breathwork techniques, holotropic breathwork and pranayama yoga, other breathwork techniques. What do you see as sort of like the universal thing that's common amongst all the breathwork? And then how do you also see what makes the shamanic breathwork unique in that way?
Mm-hmm. I think that it's pretty simple in some ways. Like I said, the great mystery is always right beneath our own nose. There's this statement where this one disciple is saying, "Master, Master, where is God?" And the Master says, "Just breathe right beneath your nose." Right under your nose, basically. In other words, under the breath. In the tradition that I grew up in, which was a Christian tradition, was basically said that God made us, from earth, from clay, and then breathed the breath of life into us. We are the breath of God, in other words. In Egypt, Khnum, the great master craftsman, takes the clay and puts us on the potter's wheel and creates a new form, which are the human beings, and creates it and breathes the breath of life into that form thousands of years before the Judeo-Christian religions were even invented. So in all the mystical traditions that I've studied, the breath is definitely the common denominator between all religions and traditions. And altering that breath through meditation, through prayer. There's a way we breathe even when we pray. And in that alteration of the breath, whether we think about it or not, we are altering our minds, our emotions, and our physical chemistry. We're moving into a different way of feeling, seeing, and thinking. People call it finding peace, inner peace, tranquility, feeling enlightened, having an inspiration, coming up with the 10 Commandments or the 4 Noble Truths or the Quran or the Torah or whatever it might be. This comes from entering an altered state of being. So there are many ways to be altered. I've tried most of them. I said yesterday, I'm a child of the 60s, so I've been on a search for altered states that would work for me. And I've found many things that will alter my consciousness, including sugar. Many things will alter my consciousness, but some are helpful, and some are the Coyote way, and some are the Wolf way. And the Coyote way is to learn by doing what you don't want to do, and the Wolf way is learning from wisdom. So you can learn by woe, and I'm not giving I want to say this right now, and I'll get back to what you asked me. I need to dignify the Coyote a little bit, because we often learn well from woe. We learn what not to do from the Coyote. But after a while, sometimes we can go, I'm really tired of learning from woe. I want to learn from wisdom. And we get to choose to learn from wisdom or woe. And the Wolf teachings are about learning from wisdom. The Coyote and the Wolf are just shadows with each other. So in this process of learning about altered states, I learned that the breath was what I was looking for. And I had it all along. I'm kind of like Dorothy with the ruby slippers. I had it all along. I could breathe 3 times or click my heels 3 times and go home. And home meant going to source. And it had nothing to do about dying and going to heaven, nirvana, or paradise. It had to do with going to my heart, to the chakra of my heart, which is both in my own chest and in my energy field that's connected to source. And as soon as I go there, I'm home. I'm already with source. I don't have to leave a body to be with source. I will be with source when I leave body. I'll be with source in body. So this breath is this great secret that's not much of a secret anymore. Everybody's doing breath work, whether it's in yoga or, as you said, in the other forms of breath work like integrative, holotropic, pranayama, meditation, qigong, tai chi. I hear so many people now talk about all these different forms of breath work that years ago when I started doing breath work simply were not around. You know, at that time, what was around that I knew I was doing it through, there were yogic breaths and tantric breaths. There was holotropic breath work. There was integrative breath work. There was rebirthing with Leonard Orr's work. And I've experienced all these forms of breath work that I'm speaking about. But all these new forms of breath work were not around. So my first breath work was a holotropic breath work, and then I went into the integrative, and that suited me better, although the holotropic I respect Stanislav Grof tremendously. The reason Jacqueline Small's work really called to me was because she was a therapist and a counselor, and I came from the field of working as a therapist and a counselor. My earliest background is working with schizophrenics and manic depressives. I worked at that time with what they called the CMIs, the chronic mentally ill. I really don't like that term, but I was 20 years old. And so I worked in that arena, and I stopped calling people chronic mentally ill. I started seeing these individuals as on a very unique journey, and that's a whole another story. But anyway, they were my best teachers, and I hope that I assisted them in their journey as well. But I worked in the mental health system for a long time, and then I also simultaneously started working in the addictions field. And I still have an addictions license. I'm a nationally certified addiction specialist. And I've been doing that for about 27 or 8 years. So I've been doing this for a long time. And yet I felt that the methods we were using were very limited. So when I started my own search, I was already searching for myself to heal and transform myself. And as I was searching for myself, and then also everything I've ever learned, I've passed on to people, much to sometimes the places where I work dismay. I would begin to pass on what I was learning and that I was stepping out of the box. But I learned that I needed to step out of the box and get bigger. And that's been very important to me. And when I found the breath work, I knew that I needed to bring the breath work. I wanted to do the breath work with the people I was working with. And eventually I left the places I was working because they didn't permit it. So it was like, they said, don't leave, you're doing great, we want you to stay. And I'm like, I would like to stay, but I can't do. And my immediate people that I worked with, sometimes supervisors and things, would want me to do it, but the organizations said no. So I left those organizations and created my own practice at the time as a breathwork facilitator. And after I had completed my training with Yosaikia and integrated breathwork and had worked as a lead trainer for Yosaikia for a while, I then developed the shamanic breathwork journey, and that's been 14 years ago. And how does it differ? Well, there are many similarities, obviously, because it's using the breath, and there are quite a few differences. In our work, we use music. Many forms of breathwork do not use any kind of music. Some people do use music, but it's not put into a particular, if you will, recipe of going through the chakras in a certain order. And even then, sometimes people will leave you out in the ethers at the end. And I've seen people not hardly be able to come back from breathwork, and they're super spaced out. And I want people to go to the altered state and to learn that they can go there and come back. And I've learned I can go altered very quick, get what I need. It's like being able to go to the refrigerator, find what I need, and come out and eat and be back and not hungry anymore. That is a wonderful tool, and it's what I'm writing about right now in my new book that's coming out from Bear & Company and Inner Traditions. It's about learning from the future, about how to go into that place and come back. So I want people to be able to come back with their breath work. I don't want them so altered they're just walking out around like space cadets. I believe we're supposed to be grounded, but we also have to be able to lift up and get ungrounded and get out of the box and then bring something back that's of value to this world. So that's the reason we use the music in the way we do. And I don't know if anybody else does it that way or not, but that's how we do it. Also, very specifically, I ask people to breathe a certain way in the beginning. Some people ask you to do a certain breath the whole time. Some people say just breathe any way you want, and we do both. We ask that you breathe a certain way in the beginning if you can, unless you have some sort of serious sinus condition or cold and can't, and then to let go and just breathe however you choose to. We also use a whole variety of art forms to bring people back. I believe in Stan Grof's work. I don't know, I haven't done his work in many, many years with holotropic, but I believe that they mainly use doing mandala work, like we did yesterday. But we use a whole variety of work. One of my favorite processes is a process that one of our teachers, Judy Merritt Redhawk, developed, which is called the Shamanic Shakti painting process, the bigger picture process. And with that, we do these wonderful, huge canvases. Each person gets a huge canvas afterwards to work with, and they work with it for about an hour and keep painting and painting and painting until they feel completed. So we do a lot of different forms. Mask making is one of my favorite. Obviously, when you have a short day, you can't do all of that. In our longer week-longs, we do many different things. We also do an in-depth, when we have a longer period of time, processing. In the early days of breath work that I was in, people said about 1 minute, here's my mandala, or here's my art, or here's my journey, and they were done in 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. And there might be 20 or 30 people in one little group with one facilitator, and they had to stick to an hour. So you didn't get to say much. I've heard people say, sitting with this heart-wrenching stories of discovering in their breath work that they've been sexually abused or that someone had just died in their family. And it was just kind of, thank you for sharing. And that just didn't fly by me. That's probably the therapist in me. Even though I don't call myself a therapist anymore, I really believe in people being able to share their emotions and feelings. And so we really focus on giving people the opportunity to speak into what's going on for them. We've uncovered this stuff. It feels kind of unfair to cut somebody off after 1 minute. And so that's really my preference, is to have no more than 6 or 8 or 10 people in a group, and to allow an hour, hour and a half to process at least that. That's a big part of the process to us. I believe the integration happens when we share, when we do art, when we journal, and when we share. The other piece that's different with the shamanic breath work, that I don't know of anybody who does this in their breath work, probably some out there, there's 6 billion people on the planet, but I don't know them, and that is soul return and extraction work during breath work. Not all facilitators are trained to do that. That's a special training. Those individuals who are trained to do that know how to, while they're working with the individual, drop in, work with the energies, and do a soul return piece or an extraction piece, because they can see someone really struggling and not being able to get to it on their own. And they assist in that way through some focused body work and some inner journeying that they can do simultaneously, and retrieve certain parts of that person's energy field that has been lost to their energy field. It's kind of like it's on the other side of a veil or something. They know how to go there and to get it, walk between the worlds. So that's a much deeper conversation we could talk about just by itself. I used to teach soul return completely separately from breath work. And then I started dropping in and just realizing I was doing it automatically in breath work, and I realized I could teach it. Now I don't even teach the traditional way that I learned. I show people what it looks like, but I say this is how we do it in breath work if you're a breath work facilitator. Some people just use the drumming or just their voice to take people into the breathing, or they just sit down and tell a person to breathe and sit with them. We use a real drum in the beginning to take people into the heartbeat and to create a certain rhythm and induction state before the music actually comes on. We use a specific kind of meditation and encourage all facilitators to adapt it to their own language, but to have certain components within that meditation. We also call people back in the breathworks that I have been involved with. I don't know of any other breathworks where you actually at the end say, it's time to come back. Now, you may do that in soul retrieval work or something, but not in breath work. We actually say it's time to come back and once again do the heartbeat and call people back. There's a lot of differences just sitting and thinking about it. And there's things that are similar as well. Certainly all the breathwork teachers that I've spoken with and that I've known, Stan Grof's work, Jackie Small's work, Leonard Orr's work, I've read Judith Kravitz's work, plus my husband trained with Judith in transformational breathwork. All those individuals, I respect all their work. There's more than one church in town, and there's different components in where we overlap. And all the work certainly speaks about different levels of consciousness and places that we go and heal. Many similarities in that way. And yet these are the ones that have come through and developed through us. I will say that our emphasis in our work, psychologically, if you will, speaking, is really about doing shadow work, owning the unowned or disowned parts of ourselves, and also about owning our future selves. The seed, the core seed, it's assuming we all have a sacred purpose, that's my core belief, and that no one is here on accident, so we're all here on purpose, and that our future self is who we're always becoming, and that our shadow self is who we've already been, and that we need to know both intimately so that we can bring them both fully present into this moment and be here now.
So there seems to be like this transcending of time in a way when you go on a journey where you say you can go in the past, the present, or the future. And a lot of people may be listening or have experience where they'll just think, oh, that's just my mind and my imagination. Like, so what for you has given you some validation from your own personal experience that this is actually a soul's journey that's sort of transcending this space-time continuum and being able to access the past, the present, and future? And so maybe you could just talk about like what for you has kind of convinced you that it's something deeper than just your mind and it's actually going to these other realms.
That, to me, is even a bigger question and answer than shamanic breath work, but it is such an important question that you're asking. And of course I have a lot of personal experience about this in my own journey, and then my mind and spirit immediately jumps to thousands of people over a course of 38 years that I have worked with, and their various journeys and all their faces and stories and journeys leap into my consciousness. And so it feels like there's so many things that's clamoring, saying, me, me, me. But here's something I want to say to you first. As a child, I obviously had a very active imagination, and I remember my parents saying at different times, and I know they didn't mean any harm by it, but they would say, you have an overactive imagination. Well, I never thought too much about that except as I was growing up, except thinking that, quite frankly, that maybe something was wrong with me, or that I was not grounded, or that I was flaky, or or that kind of thing. And yet I haven't really been flaky in my life. I've certainly had my own issues. But as an adult, I look back at that, especially when I did family of origin work and investigation, and I went, okay, first of all, to have an imagination, and if imagination is a good thing, wouldn't an overactive imagination be like the highest kind of imagination, like get an A+ on imagination if it was overactive? And of course it was Einstein that people quote all the time, that he says that imagination is more important than knowledge. And I'm paraphrasing now, but it's also known that he said all knowledge comes from imagination. The imagination is where thoughts, inspirations, ideas that turn into longing, desire, emotions, that turns into action and creation and manifestation come from. They all begin in the other world, or the other realms, or in the world of the archetypes. And the archetypes are the cast of characters who live in our imaginations. Walt Disney had a great imagination. All myths and legends, as Joseph Campbell brought to the forefront with his work, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces and Myth for Humans, or modern myths, live in the imagination. When people go into the shamanic breathwork journey, they go into these imaginal worlds The imaginal worlds consist of the past and the future. In other words, everything that's not happening in this exact nanosecond is an imagination. Think about it for a moment. You're already in the past from what I just said. And if you're imagining it, you're already in your imagination. And was that second ago real or not? Or the second now that's coming, is it real or not? Everything is in the imagination except this exact nth of a nanosecond. So it's real. It's more real than anything else. I'm going to say more about some of the things of why I experience this, but I first have to be on my podium about the imagination. I feel like that I'm redeeming all of us who are out there feeling guilty about believing in unicorns, or Santa, or whatever it might be. The archetypes and the energies of everything is alive. Grandma Twyla of the Seneca Wolf Clan Nation taught me about the field of plenty. And the field of plenty is where everything that has ever been thought of or ever will be thought of lives. It's everything. It's the abundance, it's the field of plenty of everything that can rise up in consciousness and be created. And it lives in what she calls source or the uni world, the one world. And we have a vibral core. She would always draw it as one little teeny dot on a piece of paper. She'd say, this is your vibral core. It's everything you are. And it has everything you've ever been or ever will be within it. All your Akashic records. Everything is there vibrating from that little point. And that little point draws all of its information from source. And the source provides a field of plenty for it to pull forth whatever it chooses to create. And we all go in and out of that place over and over in this form or in another. And so the imagination is what creates reality. It's not the other way around. Now, the outer reality, when I say reality, there are many realities. I need to clarify that as well. Reality is basically consensual reality of what we agree is reality. So when I look out at reality, my reality, it is a feedback loop to me. And it's showing me, all it's showing me is what I have brought forth from my vibral core, from the field of plenty, and created. And if I don't like what I see, I can change it. Now, if I am firmly entrenched in that outer reality that's reflecting back to me, it may not be so easy to change. At that point, I can call on archetypes to help me. I can call on Jesus, Buddha, Kuan Yin, Isis, the great wolf spirit. I can call on figures in history. I can call on my grandmother that passed to the other side. I can call on Grandmother Twyla. I can call on something that feels bigger than my little ego attachment to this form of reality. And so those energies, because I call them, have to come. They have no other choice if I focus and ask them to come and open myself. And they want to come. That's been my experience. They want to come. Why? Because we're all connected, and it's all of our jobs, the ones in the past, the ones in the present, and the ones that live in the future in the archetypal worlds. It's all of our responsibility and sacred purpose to keep moving and changing consciousness. So, in my own experience, I have been one of those fortunate beings to experience thousands and thousands of amazing synchronicities in my life and witness others. For instance, yesterday in Breathe America, as we were sitting in our circle together, an opening circle, and I was teaching a little bit about shamanic breath work and the journey and the magic of the work and what we were going to do for the day, I spoke about that my belief is that, much like Grandmother Twyla, who taught me about moving from the fourth world to the fifth world, that we were moving from the fourth world of separation and isolation. And we were moving to the fifth world of community and unity and illumination. At that exact moment, on a dark, rainy day, light, as I said the words illumination, poured through this window that's modeled, kind of like a stained glass window, poured through the window. Right as I'm speaking about Grandma Twyla and illumination, I think the words illumination came out of my mouth, and it poured through in that moment. Obviously, to me, that was Grandma. That's the way she speaks to me. The whole room kind of went, ah. Now, you could say, well, that was a synchronicity. Yes, it was. But why out of all the thousands of synchronicities in that moment would a light come through a window as we're speaking about illumination? You could chalk that one up to complete coincidence if you want to. But a moment later, I'm speaking, I said, well, Grandma Twyla wants me to tell you this story. And so I began to tell something else about her story. And right as I hit the climax of that story, the light comes through again. I think it happened 3 times during that 30-minute talk that I gave. These moments are powerful moments where the other worlds are breaking through and saying there's something beyond what you're just seeing or experiencing out here. But it also breaks through so that these outer senses can actually grok it. It actually gives people faith and something to aspire to. And it can happen much easier in groups because the people who are really sitting in disbelief, as there are people with more belief experience it, it begins to penetrate their psyches so that they can begin to have these experiences too. People's lives change when they have experiences that penetrate the core of their being. That's what enlightenment is. You know the old adage of, what do you do before enlightenment? Chop wood and carry water. What do you do after enlightenment? Chop wood and carry water. The enlightenment experience or the imaginational experience will not live unless you keep working it afterwards. So it's important that people have these powerful experiences like they do in the breath work of touching into the imaginal realms and pulling in the future and clearing out obstacles so that they can see who it is they really are and remember. There is an imprint that happens in a cellular level when that happens with people. When they come out of that experience, it's there and it lasts for a while. And if people will follow the guidelines that I write about in my book, they will keep that experience alive for a long time. You know, it's like you eat a really good meal, a healthy meal, and it carries you for a long time. If you go out and eat a fast food meal, even though it's high in fat and grease and all these different things, you are hungry again in an hour or two. You feel like you haven't eaten. And it's not nurturing you. These experiences nurture the cells of your body and feed you spiritually. And people cannot live by bread alone. So when you have that experience, that spiritual food, it will carry you for a long time. For me, when I start getting hungry again in that way, and I start seeking out lesser gods like caffeine and sugar, I know that it's time for me to breathe. And I have another breathwork experience, and I open back up and I clear out what's in my way. And for me right now, that's usually about once a month or once every 2 months, sometimes once every 3 months. But I've done a lot. I've done over 350 breathworks in my life personally. So I don't know if that really answered what you asked me, but that's where my answer wanted to go about the importance of knowing that this exists and that it's real and we can travel between these worlds, and that it's important to be a time traveler and important not to get stuck in thinking that just this second is all that's real. It's all real.
Yeah, and I remember you telling a story about how you first met Grandmother Twyla. That seemed to be a pretty strong indication to me, where you had visions about something that was happening, that you actually had visions of this person in your dreams and you actually met her. And so maybe if you want to just sort of expand on that a bit too.
I'd actually like to tell you a different story that happened more recently. That story happened in my late 30s, and this is a story that happened last summer. Last summer, I was in a breathwork journey, and my husband was breathing me at the time. Sometimes we'll take some time even away from our own retreat center. We have a retreat center in western North Carolina outside of Cherokee and Asheville called the Isis Cove Retreat Center. Many people come there to do breathwork and healing and training. And we live in this beautiful place, but sometimes we'll get out of the energy field and go someplace else. So we have some friends that have a house on the top of a mountain that looks out over all of the Smokies. It's very powerful. And we went up there to get away for a few days completely by ourselves. And while we were up there, we did breath work. I mean, you don't have anything up there, a cell phone, nothing. And so we did have battery-generated music for ourselves. And so I did a breath work up there. And then in that experience, I had this experience that was very powerful and very archetypal. But I saw a lot of destruction happening on the planet, what we refer to as earth changes. I saw the water becoming very, very polluted. And I became very deeply in grief during this breath work. I saw myself as a lioness. I became a lioness, and I was walking around trying to find water to drink. And I couldn't find any water that didn't have mercury or toxic chemicals in it, and I couldn't drink any of the water. And I was just watching all the animals from all over the world going to their water sources, creeks, streams, springs, in the oceans. No one could partake of any of the water, and I didn't even see the humans. These were just the animals. And then I began to see that the air was very difficult to breathe for myself. And I saw that was difficult, whether it was fish or four-leggeds or the creatures that were flying, it was very difficult for everyone to breathe. And then I saw like a smoke in the air, and I noticed forests were completely burned down and gone. And then droughts. And I was seeing all these conditions, and the waters and the oceans were just like murky and like oil slicks. And I became extremely upset in my breath work. I've had a few breath works like this before, where I was seeing destruction of the world in different kinds, or where I've seen massacres in the Native American villages, or things like where I was there. But this felt so current and so real. And I became deeply angry as a lion, and I was roaring, and I was slashing with my claws, and I wanted to destroy those who had destroyed the planet. I was deeply angry. And at one point, I was just like a wild woman on my blanket. I was slashing and growling and ripping and tearing. And then I just gave up. I went into almost like despair. And I just felt like it's too late. It's all over. And then this part of me that remembered that I'm a human being, and my work and my dedication, especially for the past 28 years, since my first Saturn return, that's when I made my complete dedication to be of planetary service. I felt this place of grief, like I've done this all for nothing. I've dedicated my life. It's all going to end. This is what it's going to look like. And I felt guilty and ashamed for feeling that way in the breath work. But that's how I felt. That's not ever happened to me in the breath work before, or it's not something that I feel in my outer world. I feel optimistic, but not in my breath work. And so I went into that experience and just let myself feel it. I've learned to go with the flow and feel what's real and let it come. Because the truth is whether I admit it in my outer world or not, if it's coming up, it's there, even if it's in my shadow. So that came up, and I just went into grief, and I was just saying, it's all been for nothing, it's all been for nothing, it's too late. And I had been prior to that, and all the gatherings I was going to, saying, it's not too late, it's not too late, in my outer world. So here I am, lying here crying in my husband's arms, and the next moment, I felt myself being lifted up into the air. And as I was being lifted, I looked up, and I noticed that I'm being lifted by this huge goddess. She was the size of a building, but perfectly formed in her form, but it was an archetype. And I knew I was looking into the face of the goddess Isis. And even though I've had all these experiences with the Egyptian pantheon, including Isis, and our center is called Isis Co., honestly, I had never had a true, direct experience with this goddess. I was in awe. She was magnificent. Her eyes were piercing. Her hands were huge, and she was holding me. And here I am, this lioness, and she's holding me in her hands like a little bitty baby. And then I noticed, as I looked at my body, that I had turned into a tiger. And for some reason, I had attachment to being a lion. I didn't want to be a tiger. You know, you do weird things in your breath work. I just wanted to be a lion. And she looked at me and she said, I'm holding you, and you're a tiger because you're my daughter. And I thought, well, what does a tiger have to do with being your daughter? And she opened her wings, and they were multicolored stripes. And she said, you're a tiger, you are my daughter, and you are striped. And she said, I'm going to support you. I'm going to help you. Know that you are not only the daughter of your parents and your lineage of humans, but that you're my daughter. You were my daughter before you were theirs. And no longer are you going to identify with just being an adult child of, a family, or as people do in the world, being adult child of an alcoholic or an adult child of dysfunctional families, ACOAs. You are an adult child of God, an ACOG, a cog. You are an adult child of God. And it's part of your purpose is to help others become adult children of God and to grow up. And I thought, but it's all too late. I've seen the future. I'm a visionary, and it's all too late. And I was kind of arguing with this goddess, and I can be cocky sometimes. And she just kind of looked at me. She was being patient. Isis is not always patient, but she was patient at this moment. And what she said to me is, why do you say that it's a waste? And why are you saying this? And I said, because look at all this destruction that's happening. If this is going to happen, it's been a waste. And she said, did you create and have you assisted others out of love? And I said, yes. And then she said, with this very strong voice, nothing that has been created in the name of love, for the sake of love, to create love, has ever been wasted on this planet or any other. And even if this planet went, and even if this experiment failed, love has never been a mistake and has never been wasted. And all acts of kindness and love are mine. Well, then I really started weeping. And I felt this energy come over me, a little bit of hope start to rise up inside of me. I said, well, is it going to end this way? And she didn't answer me. And she looked at me and she said, build 5 temples and I will do the rest. And I said, and what are the temples? She said, 1 to spirit, 1 to fire, 1 to earth, 1 to air, and 1 to water. And I will do the rest. So I came out of that breath work and I thought, gosh, I'm a little busy in my life. How am I supposed to build 5 temples? And she showed me what they were to look like. And one was to be a medicine wheel. That was to be the earth temple. One was to be a 6-pointed, beautiful blue star and a big observation deck out over this mountain where we live as the star spirit temple. And one was to be a fire temple and to have some way to create fires where people could, we do fire walks, where people could do fire walks, we could burn things of fire, we could have drumming circles, things like that. Those 3 were to be outside. And then 2 were to be inside temples, and one was to be an air temple that's circular and that where like 100 people, kind of like that crystal temple that we were in yesterday, except circular where 100 people could breathe at a time. And the other is to be a water temple that's a function where people can move into the water, a body of water of some kind. And one of my dear friends, Sarah Clare, who's had a vision of an Isis water temple, we believe that that's maybe the water temple that's supposed to be there. But it had to have a form of indoor water where people could go into the water. Well, that was last August, not this past August, but a little over a year ago in August. And I just thought, I don't know how I can do this. I have a full book schedule. I'm doing all these other things, and I don't know how I can do this. And I thought about it for a few days. And the day that I finally said to myself, okay, I will do this. I don't know how I will do it, but I will do it. Okay, Isis, I will do it. You said the rest is up to you, so that's what I will do. That very day, when I said I will do it, a woman named Windaughter, who is the medicine chief of the bear tribe that Sun Bear founded before he passed, and she became a medicine carrier for that tribe. And she's also now the chief of the Panther tribe, medicine carrier, and works with that, emails me and said, would you like for me to come to Isis Cove and build a medicine wheel on your property? I know you have spoken about, the medicine wheel before, and I'm just wondering if you'd like for me to do that, and we could have the Bear Tribe medicine wheel gathering there this next year. And I just wrote her back, and I just said, can I call you? And so I called her, and we spoke for 3 hours, and I told her this vision. And I said, how do you think Sun Bear would feel, being on the other side with this wheel being dedicated to Isis? And she said, knowing Sun Bear, the visionary he was and is still from the other side, he would be honored. Just shortly after I spoke with her, she came, and we put together with some other people 37 beautiful stones that each weigh about a ton each in a beautiful medicine wheel anyway, it was a big deal. And then she came this summer, and about 50 people came together, and we consecrated it for several days with different teachers there. Also, the community that I live in, the retreat center where we are, we also have an intentional community there, stepped forward and made contribution to create the Star Temple deck. And so the Star Temple is the place for the spirit temple. And then another woman who goes by the name of Sacred Flame had a vision in December of last year for the fire temple of building a beautiful, it's about a 10 or 12-foot metal arch. For people who know what Burning Man is, it's like installations they put in at the Burning Man celebrations every year, that is carved out of metal and has carved images of flames through it, and it's a flame itself, and completely visioned it, commissioned the people to build it, brought them there, and paid for it, and put this flame up that has a filament through it to put propane through it so that it lights up with flames, and that you walk through it into a big circle of stones where we do fire walks and can have fires there. And so those 3 temples were created almost effortlessly on my part, except being open to people creating it and bringing it there. Now, the next 2, those were created in the first year. They're outdoors. Of course, those were much less expensive to create as far as money goes. And now the next 2 creations are the air temple and the spirit temple. Those came from a vision in a breath work, a 1-hour breath work of my own despair, my own deep longing for transformation on this planet, and not feeling up to it, not feeling big enough, and connecting directly with Isis, something bigger than myself, than my human self, who said, just do it, and I'll do the rest. In other words, it was make the decision. And I think that's something that we all need to hear right now on the planet. We all need to hear, because there's so much that we're facing, and we just can't do it from where we're coming from. We really have to vision, clear out, go to those places of shadow and grief and despair, and open up to the bigger story and commit ourselves to just doing it and trusting that something bigger than us wants this more than we do. And that in co-creation and co-collaboration, if we're willing to heal and transform ourselves, we'll open to our future. And it will happen not without effort, but not nearly the effort that we thought we were going to have. And certainly not the hopelessness that we have around things. It's important not to be overly idealistic and just be airy-fairy. But it's also important not to get stuck in the muck and think that things can't change. They can, and they do, all the time. All the time, trillions of cells in our bodies are changing. If they can do it, so can we.
Okay, great. Is there anything else that is left unsaid that you feel like needs to be said?
I'm just have rededicated and recommitted myself from that experience to now, one day at a time, to make the quantum leap and to do my part. I'm not here to save the world. It doesn't need saving. What needs saving are people and animals, but the world itself will exist and all those things will regenerate. But people themselves, our own souls, need saving, and I don't mean that from a fundamentalist point of view. We need to remember that first and foremost that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we have souls that need to be regenerated, replenished, renewed, brought back, and returned, so that everything that we do in our lives is said with a prayer and said with gratitude, and that we can open up to the abundance of the one world, of the field of plenty, and that we can know that there is an abundance that waits for us in our future of many wonderful things. And if we don't open up to that, then some of those things are not going to be so wonderful, and they're already not so wonderful. But still today in this world, right now at this moment, the good far exceeds the negative. And we can say we're still creating mostly good. And there are some people that argue that with me, but because I have the golden opportunity to know thousands of people intimately and deeply, I know that that is true. And that for every bad deed, there's thousands of unseen by the news of good deeds and good things that come from people. And there are thousands of people that put their lives, their very lives, physical beings, at risk every day for other beings. This is the goodness that's in all of us, and it is in every one of us. It may be hard to find in some of us, but it's there. So I am once again hopeful, and I am committed to sharing that hope and making it a living reality in my own inner work and growing up and being an adult child of the universe. And I want to support others in doing that as well.
Well, thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to recommit.
EngagedHeart.com